Okay, let's continue with the so-called reasonable questions.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the #1 priority for a rational thinker now?
Now from memory, this H-bomber guy made a video response to Sargon in which he claims that he debunked Sargon debunking I think it was the 1 in 5 claim. 1 in 5 women are raped in their lifetime claim. And from memory, when I was watching that video, I noticed that this H-bomber guy made a lot of mistakes. Now, I intended to do a response, but I haven't got around to it. And to be honest, I kind of forgot about it because, well, I've been very busy this year. But maybe I should find that video and look at it again and possibly move it up the list of videos to respond to. But I tell you what, even though this question is clearly framed at Sargon and it's technically meant to be towards all of us as opposed to individuals, I'm actually going to answer it as if it wasn't framed at an individual but aimed at all of us. So why do we spend so much time debunking studies done by feminists like the 1 in 5 myth? Well, first of all, truth is important, facts are important, and if a study is faulty and wrong, then yeah, it is important to debunk it. Our first priority shouldn't be ideology, it should be the truth. And if the truth is that 1 in 5 women are raped, then we should go with that. But if that is untrue, then we shouldn't go with it. It's really that simple. But there is a more sinister point to this, and that is the 1 in 5 myth is used to create hysteria. And that hysteria has a very negative effect. Now there's this thing called due process. H-bomber, if you're watching this, you may have heard of this thing. It's kind of important. You know, it's just kind of the cornerstone of our legal system, where someone has the right to a fair trial and they have the right to legal representation in that trial. You know, it's only a little thing. I know, right? I know. You social justice types who are so concerned about so many things, I'm not surprised that you've missed this one, because really, the cornerstone of our fucking legal system really isn't that important, is it? I mean, clearly, having a fair trial and legal representation has nothing to do with justice in a society, does it? And it's hysteria which is created by this 1 in 5 myth, which is eroding that, in particular on college campuses, where they now have kangaroo courts, where someone's word and the preponderance of evidence is enough to get someone kicked out of university, without a fair trial or fucking legal representation. You claim to be about social justice, yet you promote shit which erodes justice in our society. Do you see why you get criticised? Next.
Does it maybe say something about your priorities? Nah, it's fine, it's the feminazis, we have to stop them. They're taking away our video games.
No, it's not about video games. It's about a person who is accused of a crime being able to have a fair trial with legal representation. Do you not understand that? Stop this fucking straw man with the fucking video games. No one's trying to debunk the 1 in 5 myth because of Anita Sarkeesian and video games, you fucking moron. It's about the legal system. It's about the right to a fair trial with legal representation. And the fact that you have to straw man the argument is really offensive and shows that you have no fucking interest in actual justice. Next.
Look, Anita, I'm sorry, but I can't actually destroy video games. That doesn't make any sense.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections.
Now, Christy Winters made the argument earlier that our side goes after the most extreme example of feminists, and we should be tackling the best arguments put forward by feminists instead of going for the low-hanging fruit. Well, guess what? You're going for the low-hanging fruit right now. Alright, someone like Sargon, for example, who has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, he can't be responsible for a handful of people who leave nasty comments or trollish comments in his comment section. That is what we would call low-hanging fruit. Now, you're more than welcome to criticise those individuals, and if someone who was a big-name YouTuber used those comments in a video, you're more than welcome to criticise them for that. But don't try to use those comments to slander all of us. They're a minority, they're most likely trolls, and you should listen to what Christy Winters said just before.
I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out, at least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
Yeah, of course. I've got a long track record of talking to people from the other side. I've actually not talked to a Muslim. I have talked to an ex-Muslim before, though. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk to a Muslim. Moderate or extreme, to be honest.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general?
You would have to define systemic and racism. I have no doubt that there is some racism towards some black people. And a good example of that is a topic I talk about often, which is the sentencing gap, where black men are more likely to be arrested and more likely to be found guilty and more likely to get a longer sentence than white men. But here's the catch. If you claim that there is systemic discrimination against black men because of the sentencing gap, then you also have to admit that there is systemic discrimination against men in general, because the gender sentencing gap is 6 times larger than the racial sentencing gap. Just wondering, are you willing to admit that, or does it only count when it happens to black men?
If so, what? Okay, just step over. Just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk. If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
Well, I think Black Lives Matter actually does a good job of demonizing themselves, don't they?
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black-on-black crime, when are you going to do a video about white-on-white crime and what we, as white people, can do to solve the problems in our community?
Okay, so I've never done a video specifically about black-on-black crime, but I guess it's possible I might have mentioned it somewhere, because I have done a lot of videos. But let me answer your question anyway. Why would someone talk about black-on-black crime and not white-on-white crime? Well, Christy, you really have to put it in its proper context. Context is always important. You should know that. When the conversation is framed that black people are oppressed because there are so many white people killing them, it's not surprising that some people point out that there are more black people killing other black people than there are white people killing black people. So this argument really has nothing to do with white-on-white crime, because no one is making the argument that white people are oppressed because black people are killing them. Can you see the context of that, Christy? Now, I'm not going to go into whether this is a good argument or not, because that's irrelevant. What is relevant here is that Christy either doesn't understand the context or has purposely ignored the context. Next.
Why is a literal teenager's different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, no! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!
Oh, God, not this guy again. He thinks he's funny, and he's not. And he thinks he's intelligent, and he's not. Yeah. Look, I will agree on one thing, though. I think the whole Milo thing was overdone. I think too many people replied to Milo, and clearly Milo is low-hanging fruit. But since I never replied to Milo and have no intention of doing so, I'm not going to speak for other people.
Wherever did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity?
Yeah, I don't think that, Steve. You must have me confused with someone else.
And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
Okay, let me see if I've got this straight. Steve is suggesting that just because someone doesn't think they're a racist or doesn't claim to be a racist, that doesn't mean that they're not a racist. And, you know, this is sound logic. Steve is correct here. But he misses out on one very important thing, and that is just because someone claims that you are a racist doesn't mean that you are racist. That's the other side of the coin, Steve, that you seem to have forgotten.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment, as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
I would say the largest hurdle standing in the way of someone having equal opportunity would be financial. If you come from a poor background, live in a poor neighbourhood, then you're less likely to get a good education, for example. You're less likely to get into university, and you're less likely to be able to afford it. And it is true in America, poverty does seem to affect African Americans more than, say, whites or Asians. And this is a very complex issue, obviously. But should we take into account someone's economic background or just their racial background? If someone is black and they come from a very wealthy background or even a middle class background, should we give them an advantage over someone who is white and comes from a very poor background? Or should we just look at individual cases based on their merit? Excuse the pun, but this isn't black and white.
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, you know, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
Well, the statement all lives matter would still include black lives, wouldn't it? But look, I do get your point. And I think, yeah, I think you make a valid point. But once again, we have to look at this in context. And the context is that there are a lot of people out there who disagree with Black Lives Matter because of the actions of Black Lives Matter.
Isn't it offensive to men to assume that a man could only ever want equality for women and therefore be comfortable with feminism as a whole in order to get laid, and that reduces us to beasts?
I would agree with you 100%, Tim, and I've actually spoken out against this numerous times before. You are correct. Saying that someone is only a feminist, a male feminist, to get laid is a bullshit argument. However, I do think there are a lot of male feminists out there who are looking for female approval or female validation, which is a lot different than just wanting to get laid. But you got to realise, Tim, that this sex-shaming behaviour happens on both sides. And when your side does it, it's often in the mainstream media. It's often one of the main arguments used against us, where men's rights activists are just painted as sad, weird, lonely guys who can't get laid. Because apparently, if I'm concerned about the rates of male suicide and newborn babies having parts of their penis cut off against their will, the only reason I'm doing that is because I don't have enough sex with women. I mean, it's a perfectly sound, logical argument, isn't it? And it's one, once again, let me point out, it's one which is made by the mainstream media on your side. So you have a very, very valid point, Tim. One which I've made numerous times in the past. Hopefully you will now judge your own side by the same standard.
If that was the case, wouldn't I attempt to get laid from my views instead of not ever trying that?
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs?
Man-hating slurs? You mean like toxic masculinity? Oh, sorry, you said egalitarian, not feminist. By all means, continue.
That you see coming from people within your community, people who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina?
Okay, let's start with the term mangina. Now, it's a very simple term you should be able to understand, Christy, because your side has a version of it. You see, what a mangina is, he's someone who hates his own masculinity. In other words, he has internalized misandry. And you guys have a habit of accusing any woman who doesn't like feminism as having internalized misogyny. Now, I will admit that both the term mangina, which remember is internalized misandry, and the term internalized misogyny are both overused and used in cases where they should not be used, although there are legitimate cases where they do apply. The term beta male is used by the pickup artists, and we tend to criticize them for such bullshit. I only ever use the word cuck sarcastically, and by that I mean making fun of those who use the word cuck because it's so overused, it's lost all meaning. And let's face it, I think most people these days are using it in that way because it's been so overused. And I even see feminists using it in a sarcastic way. I'm pretty sure Tim, who we just saw a minute ago, has used the word cuck in that sarcastic way. I know Russian Deadpool has used it in that way when I've been doing hangouts with him.
Okay, all right. So, can I rebut?
Of course you can.
Okay, I appreciate the female giving me leave to speak. No, I'm kidding.
You're a feminist. I should give you permission.
I am beta male mangina.
That's right. You wait. What's the fucking word? Oh, you cuck. There it is.
Yeah, total cuck.
Yeah, totally. Mega mangina, Lord Commander cuck.
And what was the other word? The other word was faggot, wasn't it? Okay, that one's a bit more complex. People from my generation do see it as an offensive word, but if you look at younger generations and the way they use it, they're using it in a completely different context. Now, I'm not suggesting that that is either right or wrong, but once again it comes down to the context of how a person uses a particular word. If it's used as a slur against gay people, yeah, you have a case under those circumstances. If it's used in a different context, which it's being used all the time these days by younger people, then it's a different case altogether. And maybe while we're talking about slurs against males, Christy, we should have a look at all the slurs that feminists constantly use against men. Like I mentioned earlier, toxic masculinity, because masculinity by its very nature is toxic, right? And this is an interesting one, because what feminists tend to do is they take positive male attributes, stereotypes, And they say, well, these aren't really male attributes or stereotypes because they can also apply to females. Okay, fair enough. That's a fair enough argument. But when it comes to negative male attributes and stereotypes, the exact same argument should be made if we're going to be consistent. But strangely, it's not. Strangely, under those circumstances, then these stereotypes or attributes only apply to males, even though they could equally apply to women. But in that case, we hear, but it's more common amongst men. Okay then, let's go back to that first argument where the positive male attributes or stereotypes are more common amongst men. Correct? Oh no, but hold on a second. They could also apply to women. Be consistent with your arguing. It's not too much to ask, okay? Either both negative and positive male stereotypes apply to both male and female because they're not restricted to just males, or alternatively, because they're supposedly more common to males, then both apply to males, more so than women. Be consistent with your argumentation. Not too much to ask, Christy.
All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman.
Yeah, which is interesting because one of the most common arguments used against the men's rights movement is they're just lonely guys who can't get laid. Is that the type of thing you're talking about, Christy? The sex shaming that constantly comes from feminists, often in the mainstream media, once again. Now, part of this is confusion on your side. Some people are so ignorant that they don't know the difference between pickup artists and men's rights activists, even though there is a clear fucking difference. But there are those who do know the difference and don't give a shit. And they use the pickup artists as a convenient way to demonize the men's rights movement and to reduce our legitimate concerns to they're just a bunch of lonely guys who can't get laid. So I have to ask, Christy, what are you doing about this on your side? Are you in the comment section of articles about men's rights activists? Are you complaining that their use of sex shaming is inappropriate? Are you making videos about this subject? Because you've asked us to police our side, I'm now asking you to police yours. I'm asking you to be consistent.
That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
Liberals used to be the party of due process. They used to care about legal rights for the accused. They decried McCarthyism and denying due process. The ACLU focuses on a whole bunch of liberal issues. Obama, as a candidate, talked about habeas corpus for military tribunals. Yet now, if you accuse someone of rape, no due process. Not necessary. Investigation over. You've been accused of rape, you're guilty, done. And I'm not sure where the change was. Why is it that if you're an accused terrorist, you need due process, but if you're an accused rapist, you don't?
We've got to debunk him now! Ow! And we've got to debunk him now! Ow! And we've got to debunk him now! Ow!